Yo, what's going on everybody? SaberWolf94 and welcome to the Pokemon TCG Overview, where we're covering Shiftry and his neat lower evolution line. I actually did use this Pokemon in my original playthrough of Ruby, though it was mostly Nuzleaf until I got a Leaf Stone to evolve it. I really thought this Pokemon was cool, and thought he was pretty strong too before, when I didn't know the stats of any Pokemon. These days, while I still kind of like Shiftry, I don't dig it as much as I used to, and I like Seedot and Nuzleaf better anyway. Speaking of which, the little acorn has never had any Poke Power, Poke Body, or ability, and even the newest prints never had it hit 60 HP. Every Seedot in the EX series had 40 HP, and while the Diamond and Pearl print finally got at least 50, they gave it 40 HP all the way after in Rise and Rivals. The poor little nut Pokemon. It resisted water at least in the 4th and 5th generation, but it's only 3 cards. Nuzleaf never got any abilities either, but since it's also a dark Pokemon, he's seen a lot of Dark-type prints, always making him weak to fighting and resistant Psychic. It's too bad they never did anything with the energy attacks like other Pokemon with 2 types. Since I know Cacnea and Cacturn utilize both types in their attacks on some cards, I thought for sure at least Nuzleaf would do this too on some cards, but I was wrong. However, Nuzleaf from Rise and Rivals is the only Dark-type Nuzleaf to be weak to fire instead of fighting, so at least it gets some varying weakness. Nuzleaf also gets a Japanese movie promo from the 6th movie, and as far as I know, both him and Seedot don't have any other promos or special cards. Unsurprisingly, Shiftry gets his most prints in its debuting generation, a good 7, with following gens getting sparse in all fairness. Just like both his pre-evolutions, he gets 2 cards in EX Sandstorm where he debuts, a decent holo one and a regular rare shitty one. When you look at the first and holo Shiftry, you'll see an 80 for 4 attack. Very impressive for a non-EX Pokemon. It's going to do 10 less for each energy the defending Pokemon has, and unlike the DP era, Shiftry really got shortchanged here, with the EX series being possibly the slowest, most setup-oriented eras of the Pokemon TCG. His power is supposed to help you, letting you flip a coin, and if heads you get to return an energy from the defending Pokemon to the hand. Not a useless power for sure. In fact, with energy removal 2 and a couple of Shiftries, you may have an energy disruption strategy going here, but obviously the coin flip is in the way. Its stats are solid, with 120 HP being the best you could ask for on a non-EX Stage 2 Pokemon during that time. A decent start, but the attack isn't very good. You have to aim 70 damage at least to be able to say you're taking advantage of it, since 60 for 4 isn't special. Speaking of which, the lesser Shiftry does straight up 60 for 4, and that's just pretty average. Now Wolf, you might say, doesn't Salamence from EX Dragon do 60 for 4 too? So why is this card shit? That Salamence had a solid power and a double resistance, getting it as slight as passable at least. This card has the same stats as the holo Shiftry, but a 40 snipe for 3 isn't that amazing. I suppose average is more fitting than straight shit, but the best part about this card for me is the iconic art. Not long after Sandstorm, Shiftry got to be Dark type in EX Hit and Legends, giving it the common fighting weakness and psychic resistance Dark Pokemon have. It's got 10 less HP than the previous ones, but its attacks are much more workable. Push aside does solid 2 for 30 with some hand disruption, letting you put a Pokemon from your opponent's hand at the bottom of the deck. You always get to look at your opponent's hand, and that effect was more neat in that era. It could also help with supernatural power, an attack that can do a very good 80 for 3 if you have the same number of cards in hand as your opponent. This is a much easier way to try and do 80 compared to Sandstorm Shiftry, and it works with 1 less energy, hell with any energy type too. Since it's a dark type, we also can't forget the benefit of special dark energy, so no doubt this card hits harder than the other two. EX Deoxys Shiftry went back to Grass type, and it's actually the last Grass Shiftry from this era, and the best one for sure. 10 less HP compared to the Sandstorm guys once again, but it has 1 less retreat cost and better tricks. Fan Action is a war point for your opponent, and while not the most special exclusive effect, it is simple to use and can prove effective. Stadium Power will always do 70 damage for 3 if there's a Stadium card in play, which is great if you ask me. Having a Stadium card in play isn't that big of a condition, especially since it works with your opponent's one. There isn't much else to say, it's a pretty simple but good card. If you want to use Grass Shiftry in that era, go with this one. Legend Maker Shiftry is the last non-EX Shiftry, switches things back to Dark again, and it might be the most well-rounded non-EX Shiftry too from this era. Not that surprising coming from Legend Maker, but what makes this card so good is the ability to pull off a familiar but powerful strategy, to pick up your shit and put it into the hand shit. When you evolve to this card, Evolutionary Fan lets you pick up any of your evolved Pokemon besides any Shiftry, and put it back in your hand along with all attached cards. Not being able to pick itself up is understandable, but it sucks you can't pick up any other Shiftry, period. It may have been too broken, I suppose. Nevertheless, if you use this power right with other Pokemon, it's going to be strong. It's not a bad attacker either. Reactive Beating does 2 for 30 and ought to confuse you if you have a React Energy attached. This was a thing in Legend Maker, with React Energy being a special energy released in that set, but either way it doesn't affect Crosscut, which is the real attack you want to use. This is also a 3 for 70 attack, but only if the defending Pokemon is evolved. It's debatable if this is a better attack than the one EX Deoxys Shiftry uses. I think I like that one better, but this one has its advantages too. Evolved Pokemon were usually more threatening back then, so your opponent will likely be using them, so you'll likely have the effect of extra damage active. You don't have to bother with extra cards like Stadiums, and this attack can get stronger with special Dark Energy. On the flip side though, Stadium Power will hit basics for 72, and without the effect, it's a 3 for 50 attack as opposed to 3 for 40. Either way, both are great Shiftry cards. And the last 2 Shiftry cards from this era are the 2 EXs this guy gets. I always thought it was unfair for Ludicolo, which got no EX in the era while Shiftry got 2. I mean, Shiftry was used by Sydney too, but still. The first one comes in Crystal Guardians and is the most reliable and consistent to use out of the 2. 140 HP, while still above the limit of non-EX Pokemon, is still a little low, seeing as other EX Pokemon got 150 or even 160 HP. Free Retreat is great, but that double weakness is fucked up. For some of you, the grass weakness might seem weird, but prior to 4th gen, poison Pokemon were grass type in the TCG, so this is Shiftry being weak to poison and fighting. The Dark Eyes Pokebody is fantastic though. Every time your opponent's Pokemon use a power, they get 2 damage counters. This is very powerful because it can stack, and because even with one it can work unlimited times in a turn. If your opponent had a couple of Pokemon using powers per turn, the self-damage would really add up. This effect goes perfectly with target attack. A snipe for 30 needing 2 energy, but if that Pokemon is hurt, you're doing 50 for 2, and that's great. Blade Arms is your solid 3 for 70 attack when you want to do straight high damage. It might seem crap when compared to the non-EX Shiftries doing 3 for 70, but it's fair. It doesn't have any conditions like the non-EX ones, and with the benefit of special darks too, it's more than enough for 3 energies. You won't see many EX Pokemon doing high damage like this for 3 energy unless they have hefty costs. With the double weakness being standard for many EX Pokemon, I can't really complain about this card, minus the 140 HP. This card is easy to use and powerful, having the power to fuck with your opponent without even attacking and just sitting on the bench with Dark Eyes. Shiftry X from Power Keepers is a more random card when it comes to effectiveness. I suppose this card was here as part of the Elite 4 theme in EX Power Keepers. It has the same stats as the Crystal Guardian CX minus the Free Retreat, so it already has a disadvantage over that one. Both of its attacks are either going to be crazy good or just terrible. Skill Hack lets you look at your opponent's hand and choose any Pokemon you find there. You can then use that Pokemon's attacks without meeting the energy requirements, but you must still meet any costs or conditions. This can range from copying something terrible, doing nothing at all, to doing 200 damage copying a Charizard EX attack or some shit for 1 energy. The rulings can be pretty funky with an attack like this too, so I'm not sure of everything, but I don't really dig it. Dirge isn't as random but can still end up being bad. It does 60 for 3, but you will do 60 more for any bench Pokemon with the same name. If your opponent just has 1 Pokemon with the same name, you're doing a whopping total 120 damage for 3, and anything beyond that is just crazy fuck damage. The scenario isn't entirely unlikely, since we have usually run multiple copies of our main Pokemon, but if there aren't any on the bench, then it's just 60 for 3. This card requires more specific situations and partners to be good, so I don't think I like it more than the previous one, but it no doubt has potential. So that's the EX era, and it wasn't really all that bad. Shiftry got a print in the original Diamond and Pearl set, so between Legend Maker, Crystal Guardians, and Power Keepers, it was at a pace where it got a card almost every set. I mean, DP was just right after EX Power Keepers. This was gonna be the start of stepping backwards, because while not a terrible card, it didn't have the new gen flair for the time. While not the max cap anymore, 120 HP was still kind of okay, but that 2 retreat cost wasn't. Darkness Fan could be powerful, but since it required a coin flip, it wasn't always a guarantee. Basically, you can devolve an opponent's Pokemon every turn if you flip heads, and put it back in the hand. Its attack Spirit Dance did 50 for 3, with the chance of doing 70 or 90 based on coin flips. Overall, this card isn't trash, but it wasn't a real step up from the best non-EX Shiftries in 3rd gen. After this card, Shiftry took a long but fair break from getting cards, with the second and only other Shiftry card to appear in Rising Rivals for the DP era, all the way to the end. It's so freaking sad because this card is all positives, but sadly got released at the wrong time. With 130 HP and only one retreat, this guy's stats were respectable, and everything else it does is neat. With the unlucky win Pokebody, you would pretty much force your opponent not to try to use almost all coin gamble cards, since they would always be tails with this effect, and as you know, most positive effects on coin cards require heads. A pretty unique but useful ability to have. Conform is decent for a 2 energy attack, doing 40 and out of confuse if you have the same cards in hand as your opponent. The attack with great potential though was Seal Off. Doing 60 for 3 wasn't great at all, but you also blocked powers and bodies on the defending Pokemon, a similar but not quite same effect from Gardevoir's attack in Secret Wonders, one of the strongest cards of all time. See, the problem is that it's limited to the active Pokemon, not everybody, so it's possible to play around, or just missing the mark with a defending Pokemon that doesn't care. A real shame. As you guys can see, this card has a lot of tricks, but unfortunately ended up as a come close card but missed the mark. Black and White saw only one Shiftry in Next Destinies, and here's a fun fact, this is one of the few cards that actually got banned. All because of the ability and nothing else. Its stats aren't anything special, as you guys can see. In fact, it could be said 130 HP was underwhelming at that time. The attack is terrible too, you would only play 4 of this card to try and get a cheap win easily. Giant Fan is a coin flip to choose any opponent's Pokemon and shuffle it along with all attached cards back into the deck when you evolve Shiftry from the hand. Despite being a luck-based effect with no guarantee, the effect was very powerful if you managed to do it. Perhaps this alone would end up being enough to ban this card, but without a doubt the biggest problem is on a terrible design choice. This effect can work even if your opponent only has one Pokemon left. Nowadays the Pokemon company is more careful with these types of effects, stating that they can't be used if your opponent has only one Pokemon out. Tapu Fini GX is a good example. You can imagine what the idea behind Shiftry would be. Use a bunch of scoop ups, AZs, and other pickup cards, play this guy as many times as you can, and hopefully cheap beat your opponent to victory. I mean, with the right random luck, you could lose just with 1 or 2 straight heads from this guy. This card didn't get banned while it was legal in Standard, perhaps because there weren't a lot of pickup cards around, or people didn't really attempt to make it work enough. Tactics like these are bullshit, so I'm sure many people are with me in that we won't miss this card. 6th Gen is the last era Shiftry got print so far, nothing for Sun and Moon yet, but it got 4 cards. Weirdly enough, despite 6th Gen including the Oras trilogy, with Primal Clash, Roaring Skies, and Ancient Origins, none of these sets have a Shiftry card. It got a card in Flashfire, Breakpoint, and Steam Siege. It's weird since this is Ludicolo's line equivalent in Rupee. Ludicolo was in Primal Clash, getting an Ancient Trait card too, but Shiftry got left out. Maybe they thought this would make things even with Shiftry getting 2 EX cards, but it's not quite right anyway. Shiftry from Flashfire is definitely my favorite from this bunch. I actually used this card quite a bit in the Skyfield days. When everyone was using Rayquaza and Raichu to kick ass, I was using this guy. Its stats are decent having 140 HP, but the 2 retreat cost was an unnecessary annoyance. The ability and attack are great though. Leaf Draw lets you discard a Grass Energy and draw 3 cards. Needing a Grass Energy is specific, so it wasn't as simple as Empoleon or Zoroark GX now, but you draw 3 instead of 2. Still a great effect if you build your deck right. You don't even have to take it into account and only use it in certain situations, since this guy is a real power attacker. The range dance will do 20 times the number of all bench Pokemon in play. It's not impossible to put a Grass and DC on this guy, and it's really possible to get one-hit KOs on EX Pokemon a few years ago. I've toyed with this card recently too, and KOing GX Pokemon isn't out of the question either with the right setup. No doubt the best one in this era and one of the best Shiftry cards period. The Shiftry in Breakpoint goes back to being dark, and tries to do a bunch of things you really don't want to do in a Stage 2 Pokemon. Conventionally anyway. Roll Up tries to discard cards from the opponent's hand. You really don't want to do that on a card like this. An Otherworldly Return will give you any trainer from the discard pile, but does ass damage for 3 energy. It's a pretty hard to use card, trying to do a few things but is average or worse at all of them. Steam Siege Shiftry isn't as bad, but it's still probably weaker than the one in Flashfire. It functions differently at least. It is the only dual type Shiftry card combining Dark and Grass, a concept Steam Siege brought back, but then they dropped it again for some reason. Wicked Wind will do 40 for 1 and negate your opponent's tools and stadiums until the end of their next turn. It's an alright effect, but on a stage 2 Pokemon you want to do more damage. Extrasensory fixes that a little bit, doing 60 for 2, but will do 120 if you have the same cards in hand as your opponent. A few things here and there would have helped this card a lot. If you put a DC on a Shiftry, you can't use Wicked Wind if you want to, so that's a waste of flexibility. A better retreat and more HP would help too. It looks decent when you view it, but cards like this these days just can't compete with shit like Metagross GX, Golisopod, etc. Shiftry gets a blister promo too that can't do anything, but Whisk Away is better than the shit Breakpoint Shiftry wants to do with discarding cards. The verdict is still terrible though. And that's it guys, all the Shiftry cards we got so far. Most Shiftry cards have always been about a powerful ability that's usually gonna spin a card in some way, and a lot of them have the same cards in hand for more damage combo. No matter what though, they always have some sort of trick meant to disrupt of some sorts. The best cards are easily in its debuting era of the 3rd generation, but it's also one of the few Pokemon that have managed to produce a card that got banned. If there's a stage 2 Pokemon you want to get creative with disruption and make it work, Shiftry is definitely one of the better candidates. Thank you guys for watching, and leave a comment on a Pokemon line you'd like to see. I might even do it if I see it's a good choice. Subscribe for excellent Pokemon TCG shit and other shit, leave a like to show love, and share this with your friends so they can learn shit too. SaberWolf94 in this motherfucker, and what's up?